A week or two ago in the Discord, Aicy, the person who was in charge of the ranked balance and multiplayer design of LittleWarGame, subcontracted off by Lava, and former top 2, top 3 player, certainly top 2, top 3 player for the game's history, at times #1, made an interesting comment. He said, by the way, if you want to see that, make a mod of it. And he mentioned specifically that he wasn't being derisive, he wasn't putting off other people's considerations for all of their theory crafting inside of the discussions about how ranked play should change. He earnestly believed that if you want to express how something can be changed inside of the ranked mode of LittleWarGame, you should just go ahead and make a mod for it. And that seems a bit strange, but for people who don't know the history of LittleWarGame, this is actually not the case of him being flippant or giving an insult or pushing, pish-poshing people off to the side. This is actually something that has a rich history inside of LittleWarGame. So as has been mentioned a couple of times, the former developer and creator of the game, Jibs, JBS, was the kind of person who had his own ideas about RTS balance. Most infamously, he believed at one point that 200 gold was a perfectly fine price for houses because when a unit dies, you recoup part of it back, not in terms of gold, but in terms of receiving the supply back extra. Now, this actually caused the snowball effect that if houses are a little more than 50% of the price of a castle, and they provide the same amount of supply and far less hit points and far less utility, I will simply expand instead. And this created a lot of metas where people would go for very fast 3 bases. It would be very hard to punish that. And there was a whole slew of things that happened inside of the balance of LittleWarGame that a lot of people just didn't feel right about. It didn't sit right with them. And so we saw a lot of people make bots to change that. Just to show that Aicy isn't being flippant as an individual or shirking his duties, he made Aicy mod. He specifically on maps like King Sejong Station, which was poured over from a StarCraft style map, he specifically made changes to the game saying, hey, what if instead of playing Jib's way, the developer's way, we play this way? That eventually, there were things that I made, such as ItanoMod, which suggested alternate branching unit paths or tech trees. There are mods that have gone greatly in depth with making other races and other factions based on historical accuracy or fantasy accuracy. XD is one of the premier examples of this. You also have such things as Ancient World 3 or AW3. This is a lot of amazing sprites by Invictus that was put together to make it come to life and spark. A lot of people play these games a great deal. There was also Ladder Edition for people who are perhaps new to this channel or weren't here around that time. Eventually, all these changes coalesced into things called Ladder Edition. Ladder Edition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's even an all-in episode on the LittleWarGame RTS channel about Ladder Edition 12 and potential changes being made to that. It's important to note that at that time, there was no developer access within the community. Jibs had left and no one had access, and so LE12 was simply the balance of the game used by other people. It was a mod. There are also players, you don't have to be a very strong player to make these mods either. There is a player named Mr. Pankaka who rather liked the idea of implementing new mech units and new styles, so he made a map that was called PKA version 1.0. You can see that throughout LittleWarGame's history, people have been making mods, not just modded maps for purposes of playing paintball and such, but to make these rank balance changes. But what's the value in that? What's the purpose in that? Well, whenever you're making a mod, there's a great quote that kind of lines up with this. I'll tweak it slightly. I'll give you the original and then I'll tweak it. From the play Hamlet by Shakespeare, it says, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Philosophy in this case means science. The implication there is that human knowledge is limited, and merely spitballing ideas is not sufficient to convey the grand majesty of the universe. But I'll change it slightly to cover this topic, and you'll see that it fits quite well. There are more things in LittleWarGame Itano than are dreamt of in your theorycraft. And it's much the same idea. You can have theorycraft, you can have ideas about what if this unit was cheaper or had this ability. I would like to see this tech unit, this path, this upgrade, these number changes, etc. But until you've actually made a mod, most of your arguments are in fact theorycrafting, and they may be resting on sound principles, and they may have a basis stronger than the Leaning Tower of Pisa, certainly. But from an architectural standpoint, they're just ideas. They're nascent. They haven't been fully formed yet. And in fact, It is a huge amount of work to go about making these mods. You are essentially undertaking the role of a game designer. In some cases, some of these mods scrap the existing tech tree entirely for LittleWarGame to build up their own concept of what should be done. And here's the layering 1, 2, 3, 4, where they have the branching divergent paths, or they have unit upgrades similar to games such as Rise of Nations. And that is a lot for one person to undertake. But when you do undertake it, people have something they can play. When people have something that they can play, they can tell you how it feels, they can provide replays showing you what goes on in the game, and balance can be addressed more directly. For all the theory crafting does not change the fact that if there is an imbalance in theorycraft, it can only be answered by a seasoned point by a more experienced player who takes time to dive into your world of theorycraft. But if you make a mod, you can highlight all the changes that you would like to make. You can make something that represents what you believe ranked play should be. And then, because it gives other people something to play, the judge is not entirely the popularity of the mod, but to some extent it is the popularity of the mod. The more people that play it, the better the mod it is, the more fleshed out it is, the more likely more people are to play it. If it has a design ethos behind it and good balancing criteria, and you're fairly active with your updates to it, then people can make more and more and more replays. They can discuss it in more and more depth. And this wouldn't be the first time that we have seen a mod reach this level of popularity. People talk about their builds in Hero Arena PvP. People talk about their builds in Raid Wars. People, to some extent, even now talk about how you build and do things in Revion TV, although that is a much smaller subcomponent. But if people do that for mods that are not in the ranked contingent, then of course people who are involved in the most active, frequently here present lifestyle gamer portion of LittleWarGame will respond in kind and positively to any extra well-intentioned and well-executed mods that are made with the goal of being ported over to ranked. And Aicy, much like he's showing the wisdom that Glava has shown in exporting the wisdom to the community. It's not that he doesn't have his own ideas. I've certainly seen things that Aicy wants to do behind the scenes that he thinks need to be tweaked or adjusted with the balance as it is. But if you want to suggest new units, new tech trees, something that's a bit radically different from the current state of LittleWarGame, the best way to do it isn't to theorycraft all day. The best way to do it is to augment your theorycrafting with a mod. If you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, or for the LittleWarGame RTS channel on Twitch, or throughout any other space that involves LittleWarGame, please consider subscribing to the Patreon link in the description box below.